Welcome to the fourth segment of Rural Report, a program that enlists experts to provide Kansas farmers and ranchers with the latest information about how COVID-19 is affecting agriculture. Rural Report is a special production of Kansas Farm Bureau in partnership with KFRM's Duane Toews and WIBW's Greg Akagi. Our guests for this edition of the Rural Report include Doug Baker, Vice President of Industry Relations with the Food Industry Association, and Jayson Lusk, a distinguished professor and head of ag economics at Purdue University. Gentlemen, great to have you on the program today. Just to give some background, let's start. Doug, tell us a little about your background in the food industry and expertise along the food supply chain, and kind of a little bit where we stand currently in the midst of COVID-19.
Sure. Happy to. Pleasure to be here today. And our parents give us a lot of sound advice throughout our life. And my father was the first person to give me a piece of sound advice and told me to go to work for a grocery store down at the corner street when I was 17 years old. That was about 34 years ago today. And so I spent about a good 11 years with Kroger, another 5 years with Kraft Nabisco, and the balance of it I've been in private brands, as well as working with FMI over the last 6 years. Areas of focus include private brands, technology, and then emergency management, where most of my efforts have been going, unfortunately, for the last couple months.
And Jayson Lusk with Purdue University, give us a little background of yours as well.
Sure. Your listeners may be curious to know that I actually have my PhD from there in Kansas, from Kansas State. So have a connection there, and picked up a wife along the way from Topeka. So I have some good memories of Kansas. I grew up in the Texas Panhandle, working on cotton farms as a kid, mainly hoeing cotton weeds, raising a few animals for 4-H and FFA, but spent most of my adult life in academics as an agricultural food economist, studying what we eat and why we eat it.
Well, certainly it is kind of an unprecedented time. We've seen some things in the United States that many of us didn't think that we likely were, and that were some empty spots, and I emphasize spots, in grocery store shelves. And many times that might have had to do with when you got there versus when the truck got there. But we have, at this point, stressed the food production system in the United States. That's really going to be our discussion points today. Jayson, let's lead it off. Can you address the apparent paradox that some consumers are seeing with those spots in grocery stores, and while simultaneously hearing reports of producers disposing of or destroying agricultural products? It's a bit disheartening.
It does. It seems kind of crazy almost that you can be dumping milk at the farm level, but yet running out of milk at the retail level. How does that happen? Well, there are people in the middle that get that milk to us, and those dairy processors often are configured to deliver to certain kind of markets in certain kinds of packaging. And so, while there's a big demand boost for food in grocery stores, we lost much of the market and food away from home. And so, again, just using milk as the example, if you have a processing facility that's packaging milk in those little small containers that you normally buy in school, well, we don't have school going on anymore. And it's not like that dairy can just switch to pumping out gallon jugs. That's a different piece of equipment. Or if you're processing cheese, you may be, packaging that in large 50-pound boxes or tubs to send out to restaurants for pizza or that sort of thing. Well, you can't just easily turn around and start packaging for the consumer retail level. So there are these bottlenecks in our food system that I think is the challenge when something that really disruptive happened, like we saw right after the wake of COVID-19.
Doug, your thoughts from the Food Industry Association's perspective?
Yeah, so everything that Dr. Lusk said is absolutely true and relevant. One thing that we did do to try and take advantage of some of those inventories was created a partnership with the International Food Service Distributors Association a few weeks back, maybe a month ago now. And what it did is that it was a fillable form that allowed those distributors to identify what they had excess of. And that could be people, equipment, food, and capacity. And then from the retail grocer side, they could fill out what it was that they needed. So we were able to do some connections between grocery retail and food service, and we were able to redeploy some of that inventory, but definitely not to the extent that avoided some of the things that people are seeing in the news cycle.
Doug, I want to follow up with something and have you answer to what Jayson alluded to, is the fact that if you have a processing facility that's used to doing one thing, you don't just switch overnight. But from the Food Industry Association's perspective, you've got people that have got product that, from my perspective, are in a situation of trying to deal with financially and contractually with others that they just haven't done business with before in trying to supply product and fill their needs.
Yeah, exactly. It's not an easy process. If you think about being a retailer or a wholesaler, when you bring in a potential new supplier partner, there's a significant number of activities that need to happen in order to get that supplier partner set up in the system. And that's difficult even if they're doing retail pack. It becomes even more difficult if they're doing a food service pack. So if you think about number 10 cans, the large institutional cans in a retail store, it has a label that is regulated by the FDA, that's got required attributes that are on that label based on the laws that FDA put forward. Not all of those same attributes are required on that same institutional size can that goes into food service because it's going to be used in recipes. And so we had to work with the FDA and the USDA and get some waivers, get some flexibility that would allow us to be able to take some of the food service products into grocery retail. And it might have been a large case of bacon and then actually repackage that in the store and prepare it for retail goods, or a product lookup code, a PLU number that you use when you scan your vegetables and your fruit at register. It allowed us to be able to assign those PLUs to packages that were in the food service industry that came to grocery retail but didn't have a UPC barcode, so there was no way to scan them at the register. So there's a lot of things that go into setting up and getting a product into the store.
Jayson, it kind of sounds like what Doug's referring to is that if you think there are easy answers to complex problems, you probably don't know all the circumstance. Well,
I think one of the things this scenario has shown is just how complicated our food system is. And, it's a food system that's in constant evolution in terms of constant change, but a lot of it's pretty gradual. And we do make changes and switches in terms of product variety and offering and suppliers, but it's not like what happens in the wake of this COVID-19 where you had to do it overnight almost. And I think that was the real challenge here is the sudden change that we all had to wake up to and respond to this new world that we lived in. I think my perspective is by and large, the food system did a remarkable job. We had this initial run and stocking out phase, but that subsided pretty quickly. And, it's not to say there wasn't some pain and some hurt along the way, but overall I've been pretty impressed with how the food system has responded to this challenge.
Doug, I'd kind of referenced in that open that there have been some open spots in retail outlets, but by and large, the industry ramped up incredibly quickly. There are some rationing scenarios, but there is product available. It's just not in the same manner and not always the same form that we would have expected it for in the past.
Yeah, and the one thing, it's any kind of crisis is unfortunate, but unfortunately, this industry, we have annual disasters. We're dealing with hurricanes and earthquakes and fires almost on an annual basis. So you could say this industry is at its best when the public needs it the most. And so there was a lot of activities that we were able to draw upon from those regional major disasters that we have to deal with. And early on, retailers and product manufacturers, one of the things they did was they started looking at the slower moving items, the flavors and the scents and the pack size that might be very slow. And if they were able to suspend them, what it did is it allowed that manufacturing facility to put more line time and more effort into the faster moving core SKUs that were in the highest demand. Now, we didn't see that it was 100% foolproof, but it definitely did help because it allowed those machines to not have to be converted over. And when you convert a machine, you got to change the label, you got to change the material, the fill that's going into it. that all takes time. And so we were able to keep those machines moving 24/7, running single type SKUs or single type pack sizes, which made them that much more efficient.
Jayson, let's lead off this segment talking about outbreaks of COVID-19 popping up at packing plants across the country. Is there concern that we'll see a shortage in retail space product delivery, and what that might mean for consumers, possibly looking at fewer cuts to choose from or an actual shortage of meat product? How do you see that envelope playing out?
Yeah, this is a rapidly evolving, very volatile situation that changes day to day. But it's a pretty serious concern out there. The data we have on animal processing numbers suggest on the beef side we're probably processing 25 to 30% fewer cattle than the same time last year. On the pork side, it's about 20%. That's a pretty significant reduction, and you can't have that kind of reduction without there having some market impacts. And indeed, over the last several days, we've seen wholesale prices increasing at a pretty dramatic clip. On the pork side, we're still below where we were last year at the wholesale price side, but beef wholesale prices have reached a high that we haven't seen in a number of years. And so I think, consumers are probably going to see some higher prices out there. Hopefully they won't see reduced availability, but, I think I'd be lying if I didn't say there aren't some concerns there. One positive news is there's been some fairly high inventories in cold storage, at least according to the latest USDA report that we may be able to rely on. One challenge may be those products in cold storage may be packaged in ways that we aren't accustomed to seeing and aren't easy to move into the grocery store setting like we've talked about previously. And I've noticed even in my own local grocery stores that I'm seeing some meat products packaged in ways that I haven't seen before, more vacuum packaging, more whole cuts, that sort of thing. So, if you're willing to buy in bulk and put in your freezer, it may be a good time in some ways. But I think there will be some price pressure in the coming days and weeks.
Doug, from the Food Industry Association and your members, how do you see this playing out, and what are you trying to do to try and minimize that effect?
Yeah, so what we're seeing and what we're hearing is it is sporadic right at the moment. You could talk to some retailers across the country depending on their customer demographic, and they're completely fine. And then other areas of the country, they do see some shortages. Mostly right now, it's primarily pork and chicken that they're feeling some of those shortages. Again, demand has also increased. So as the public starts to hear about potential concerns, the way they respond is go to the store and they stock up. And so it sort of creates an even larger situation that is at least visual. Because the supply chain is continuing to try to catch up to that. In some instances, a lot of beef anymore for retailers in many instances is case ready. But they still have the equipment in their stores, the grinders, and they still have cutters there. They might not be able to do some of those really high-end cuts, but they can do, cuts out of primals and the loins, some of those easier cuts, and then ordering chubs of meat in order to be able to grind it in store so they can keep ground beef going as well. So there's certain things that retailers can do at store level, but you're thinking about 2 to 3 weeks down the road if we continue to have labor shortages, what that might mean, as Jayson was referencing.
It's interesting, Jayson. At my own local store, I've seen 80-20 ground beef go from $2.99 to $5.29 within a matter of days, but back down. It hasn't just been a steady rise, higher in prices. I assume that has to be the retailer doing the best job they can with the situation they're presented with.
Yeah, the volatility in meat markets is just, for lack of a better word, insane, crazy in the last few days. We had in the mid-March, we had this kind of peak stocking up period whenever everybody made a run on their grocery store. And then, of course, food away from home was down. So in some ways, like aggregate demand was a little bit lower. So meat prices spiked, then they fell, and now they're spiking again. And if you just look at daily wholesale price changes, we saw the largest daily increase and the largest daily decrease that we've seen in more than a decade in just the last couple of weeks. So just a lot of volatility out there at the moment. I suspect very difficult for some of the stores to manage that Doug works with, but they dampen some of that we see as a food consumer. But I think that price rising, at the consumer level, that is the signal to us that products are increasingly scarce, and it's also the signal to us that. Yeah, I think our natural tendency is to stock up when we hear of scarcity and shortages. But you know what discourages us from doing that? Higher prices. And, that may well be coming if we head into more of this territory where packing plants are shut down even longer. Hopefully that won't happen, but that's the outcome that could.
Doug, you've kind of referenced the demand shift has shifted to retail and not wholesale or food service. A lot more folks obviously are eating at home with quarantine or stay-at-home orders around the country. That's changed the dynamics for your businesses that you work with, obviously. Looking forward, do you think that's going to change how people consume food product, or when we get to the backside of this, will they revert to their old habits of eating out more than they eat at home?
Yeah, you know what? It's early on, I would have said absolutely yes. But there's also a number of people that have had some challenging times trying to get an order online. And so maybe their first experience wasn't a great experience. We have members that do business around the world, and we have companies in China and Italy. And, what we found from talking to them is that in China, shoppers over 55, they went from online grocery shopping to returning to their normal in-store shopping regimens because that's what they were comfortable with. I do believe, though, people are learning new skills right now. And if technology would sort of cause you some anxiety and you didn't feel really comfortable placing an order online, you now have learned it out of matter of necessity. And so you might not make it a staple, but when you need to use it, you now are going to be more comfortable. So I do believe that we'll continue to see new shopping platforms and patterns arise. We originally forecasted that we'd be doing about $143 billion worth of food online by 2025. And that was a tick up from a couple previous where we were at about $100 billion by 2025. We think we're going to have to look at it again. We're either going to get there sooner or we're going to go higher than that number just because of people learning new skills.
Final question, gentlemen. Jayson, from your perspective, are there lessons that we've learned from this process that can prepare us better? Unfortunately, it may not be the last time we're in a scenario like this.
Well, hopefully we will have learned some things, and I suspect for the next couple of years we'll be looking back and analyzing the situation. I think, in a pandemic where a disease is spreading from person to person, I think where we've seen the greatest vulnerabilities has been where people are involved, where labor is involved in processing and retailing. So I think there'll be a lot of questioning about how we, hedge against those risks. Do we need more regionally distributed processing, maybe smaller plants with fewer people? Do we need more automation? You just heard Doug talk about online delivery. What will the grocery stores of the future look like? Maybe we'll get more online deliveries of the packaged items direct to our home, but maybe we'll still want to go to the store for the fresh items. It's hard to say how it's all going to shake out, but I think hopefully we'll learn some things coming out of this. But we got some immediate pressures that we got to live through first before we can get the lessons learned from them.
Doug, your final thoughts?
Yeah, to Jason's point, we're gonna analyze this one for months and potentially even years. I do believe we'll see some more automation as it relates to how people eat, if whether go out or they stay home. I think we'll learn that pretty quickly as states continue to open up. And I do believe that one thing we'll see in the grocery industry is an increased number of micro fulfillment centers that help support those online shoppers. Because today those same products are being picked from the same shelves that customers are picking from when they come into the store. So to the extent that the retailer can separate those activities and move that online order into a micro fulfillment center, it will also speed it up. So more people will be able to get their orders in a day because it's not being done with human intervention. So I think technology is going to grow, and I think we will look for ways to be more efficient if we find ourselves in this situation again.
Our thanks to Doug Baker, Vice President of Industry Relations with the Food Industry Association, and Jayson Lusk, a distinguished professor, head of Ag Economics Department at Purdue University, joining us on the Rural Report. The next edition, we'll talk about the agriculture input supply chain with Max Fisher with the National Grain and Feed Association, and John Newton, Chief Economist for the American Farm Bureau Federation, coming up soon. And that concludes this edition of the Rural Report.